We're joined now by Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Michael Creed. Minister, thank you very much for joining us. There's lots of issues we want to touch on this evening, but obviously Brexit is the first issue. UK Prime Minister Theresa May has decided to delay the vote on the withdrawal agreement. There is some speculation now about a united Ireland. Are we looking at a no-deal scenario and a crash out on March 29th?
Well, I don't believe there's a majority in the House of Commons for a no deal, but it is in many ways the default position because they have to take steps to avoid a crash out. Obviously we have the Council later this week, we will have the Heads of State meeting there, whereas we are anxious to facilitate the passage of the withdrawal treaty in the House of Commons. We cannot do so in any way that dilutes the provisions of the withdrawal agreement or in particular the issues around the no hard border. That's an imperative, and I think it's interesting to note Theresa May's own comments in that regard, where she recognised the fact that for many good reasons, not least the peace process, the border communities, etc., that the provision of a text around no hard border is something that she supports. So, the rest of the treaty is constructed around the fact that the UK is leaving, it's untangling a web of 45 years in the making, their own red lines in the sense of leaving the European Union, leaving the single market, leaving the customs union, leaving the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. You cannot have it any other way, except what's in the text of the withdrawal treaty. If we can provide some reassurances around the durability of the withdrawal treaty, around the customs union arrangement and the no hard border, we want all of that dealt with in the context of the future trading relationship, and we want that to be as close as possible. But to get to a stage where we're talking about that, we have to first of all clear the hurdle sequentially of approving the withdrawal treaty, and that's where we're at. To be honest with you, I think talk about from certain quarters about a border poll and a united Ireland is unhelpful, to say the least, at this stage. What we're trying to do is to reach out, create an understanding with all parties in Northern Ireland, bearing in mind that the DUP does not speak for a majority, but it is, obviously a critical part of the mathematics within Westminster. We are, anxious to provide as far as possible reassurances, and talking of border polls is really wide of the mark and entirely unhelpful at this stage.
Do you think a no-deal outcome is becoming more likely on the back of all of this?
I think it's more likely today than it was yesterday. Having said that, I still think it's unlikely, and I still think there is a substantial majority within the House of Commons that does not want a no-deal Brexit. But what they have to realise is, if they do not act in other ways, in other words, either approve the withdrawal treaty, extend the Article 50 process, or withdraw the Article 50 process, which we now have legal clarity on that they can do that unilaterally. If they do not act, the default position is then a hard Brexit.
The leaders in the EU and leaders within our own government are talking about intensifying preparedness now for a no-deal scenario. What is the Department of Agriculture doing, and where are you intensifying preparedness? Well,
we have been, and even at a government decision today, we have taken, steps to intensify that preparation for a no-deal Brexit. Our preparations around preparing for a no-deal Brexit are to do with, the built infrastructure that's required in our ports, in our airports, the staffing requirements that are there. They're all now going to be accelerated to take account of the UK being a third country, leaving without any agreement about what the future trading relationship is, becoming then de facto a third country, and all the requirements that go with it in terms of treating them as we do every other third country. So that requires all of the checks and balances, and that's a scenario that we want to avoid. We want the withdrawal agreement, we want then the negotiations, or we want the transition period within which we negotiate the future trading relationship. But if the UK crashes out, we have to be ready for that as well. And I think this will not be seamless. There is no country in the European Union that will be ready to hit the ground running with a fully constructed infrastructure around a no-deal Brexit. and there will be an element of crisis management in that context, but we will be accelerating our preparedness for that scenario now.
And when you say accelerating, Minister, do you mean that staff will be filled into those positions sooner than had been scheduled?
Anticipated. I mean, we have provision in our budget for 2019 of 7 million to deal with some of the infrastructure requirements around ports, airports, border post stations, etc., in the context of imported goods coming in from the UK. Obviously, in a no-deal scenario, that will obviously have to be enhanced. The level of checks will have to be enhanced, and that will bring additional staffing requirements.
Do you know how many or when those positions will be filled?
Hundreds, and that recruitment process is already underway.
Minister, sterling as well has been very volatile, particularly over the last week. Can you give any reassurances to our agri-food exporters and our traders who are watching this with great concern at the moment?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's something that we're almost tracking on a daily basis here, and obviously events of recent days and hours have seen a movement to our disadvantage in terms of the euro relative to sterling, and that's something that some of our industries have already been exposed to, particularly if you look at high volume, low margin products. Mushrooms in particular comes to mind. They've already been hit with this. We have been trying to deal with this already in terms of some of the initiatives we've brought in terms of lean manufacturing, in terms of financial assistance, capital grants for the horticulture side, in terms of low interest loans, etc. But look, I mean, we have to face the reality that Brexit is not of our making. It's a mess for us that we have to manage as best we can, but we can't avoid all of the consequences of it. Post-Brexit will never be as good as what we have today with the UK as a member of the European Union, as a member of Customs Union, as a member of the single market. And what we are doing is a damage limitation. The damage will be less if we have an agreed future trading relationship. The damage will be significantly greater if we have a crash-out Brexit.
Minister, the beef sector has really had a very, very difficult year this year, and beef and dairy are both obviously very, very exposed, and the horticulture sector with Brexit. But on the beef side, the Teagasc annual income review last week, had some pretty bleak projections. Results for this year, incomes in the suckler sector dropped 19%, for finishers on the beef side, 11%. The EU agricultural outlook projects further price volatility over the next 10 years. What assurances can you give beef farmers out there at the moment who are really struggling to grapple with the future of their own sector?
Well, we've been trying to progress a number of initiatives over the last 2 years, for example, in terms of the farmers that are challenged most by virtue of the nature of the holding they farm. We've put in nearly 50 million extra in ANC payments. That brings us back to where we were pre-2008 when the Fianna Fáil government cut the ANC payments. We're back now with 50 million extra gone into ANC payments, and in fact skewed that to farmers who are farming the most disadvantaged and marginalised land, particularly hill, and that covers some of the suckler sector. We've also this year put an additional funding of 20 million into a beef environmental efficiency programme, and that'll be paid in 2019. I accept it's a really difficult sector at the moment, and it's compounded by the continued growth in the national herd, and in particular the beef progeny coming from the dairy herd. We've been doing a lot in terms of calf exports. We put out 150,000 calf exports last year, 212,000 exports altogether of live cattle. That's up 30% on the previous year, which was up 30% on 2016. So a real active commitment to live exports as well. One of the things which I would like to see progressed, and which I have raised as an issue with farm organisations, and certainly in here there's a willingness, we've approved some people to get involved in organising farmers as producer groups so that they can negotiate better from a point of greater strength than they do as individual farmers when negotiating with the factories on issues around specification and price, etc. Also organising them to deal with kind of group purchasing of inputs, etc. And I would like to see that really accelerated in 2019. We have provided that funding, not in 2018, in fact, to the best of my knowledge, it goes back to 2017, but we haven't seen a drawdown of those funds yet.
And as you mentioned, the beef environmental efficiency pilot programme as well, that's going to be rolled out in 2019. And we saw in the VT that a farmer is actually really seeing the advantages and the benefits of that on his farm. Can you give us any more detail in terms of when and how that will be rolled out? There was a tendering process for the weighing scales, or there is soon to be a tendering process for the weighing scales.
Well, what we want to capture is the maximum possible number. So it's not confined just to the BDGP participants. It's open to every suckler farmer. We expect that there will be a majority coming from those already participating in BDGP. The data is really important to us because it allows us to continue and accelerate the journey of improving the herd, the merit of the herd, lowering the carbon footprint. It's compatible with all those objectives. So we want to get applications done as quickly as possible with a view to getting the payment out and to making sure that there is the minimum amount of leakage from the payment to the administrative side. So hopefully that most farmers would be getting the full €40 into their pockets.
And Minister, you mentioned the live exports there and the importance of that to the sector over 2019. Can you give me some detail on any markets where you see any maybe contracts that you're negotiating at the moment where you see further potential in 2019 for our live exports, and also just the importance of welfare when it comes to our live exports?
Revised veterinary certificates recently, facilitating far greater type of cattle going to Libya. You know, a win. A boat will sail shortly in terms of that market. In Egypt, we've just recently signed a new veterinary certificate as well, which does the same thing. Having the veterinary certificate, however, doesn't automatically mean that cattle will flow. What we are at is trying to improve the number and increase the number of markets and make the markets as accessible as possible. It has to be remembered that in that context, we are a taker of the terms and conditions that these markets insist upon. The pressing part of 2018 in that context was the Turkish market, which, having looked really promising from post-May 2018, where there was supposed to be a great liberalisation of the market. And that was, a genuine commitment by the Turkish authorities. Because of classical geopolitical issues, a spat between the Americans and the Turks, you had a collapse of the value of the Turkish currency, and therefore buying cattle from us was no longer feasible. We keep our eye on that market. That's a very significant and lucrative market if it were to become financially viable. We have, the criteria we want in respect to veterinary certification there. Across North Africa generally is always fertile territory for us. With the rising price of oil, it gives them greater purchasing power, so we're very clued into those markets as well. Spain is a really important one for us, for weanlings and calves. Live exporters have to be aware of this. They are a critical part of the infrastructure for our livestock industry. They have to operate to the letter of the law. Otherwise, those countries through which we transit will not facilitate the continuation of this. And that's why there has been active engagement by my department with live exporters and will continue to be. We must operate to the letter of the law in this regard.
Minister, the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy again is going to be a big issue in 2019. Also, we had, the massive extreme weather events as well. On the climate change front, there's going to be a big intensification on environmental measures in the Common Agricultural Policy, and Commissioner Hogan has been very clear about the potential of carbon quotas coming down the road, and he has said that they're not afraid to even consider culls in some member states down the road if regulations are not met on the climate front. Have you any concerns about how moving forward with dairy expansion here, and what would your advice be to farmers who are heading that road?
I think it's very clear the direction of travel we have to go. If we want to expand, we have to do so in a climate-friendly way. Nothing less will do, and in fact, it's in our own best interest because the market is equally catching up as much as our climate change, legally binding and financially punitive targets are. So we have to be best in class to deliver the best return for us in the marketplace. So, we need to read the tea leaves on this one. There are so many warnings coming from so many quarters. It's imperative that the industry positions itself to expand in a sustainable way.
Minister, finally, I just have to ask you one question. General election could be on the cards now early next year. Would you like to continue as the Minister for Agriculture?
Well, look, I don't know that there will be an election. I have really enjoyed this position. I'd like to think that I've given it my best shot in terms of the time I've had the privilege of holding the portfolio. We face into great uncertainty, not least around the issues we've discussed, CAP, climate, Brexit. And I think in that context, the last thing we need is a general election. But if it comes, so be it. I think we, as a party, have always been understanding of the issues around rural Ireland and inside the farm gate in particular. And I think we have, at a time when we've been through very difficult times economically, and as resources have increasingly become more available, we have, I think, been successful in securing our fair share for the agricultural sector. And in that context, I think, the farming community out there are aware of that also.
We'll leave it there, Minister. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Claire.